9.1 Solving equations by taking square roots. When we are taking square roots, we want to remember the plus or minus option. So we can take the square root of a number and it can be a positive as well as a negative. If we look at the first set of examples, we're just finding each square root. So this goes back to module 8 where we're finding the square roots of numbers. So for example A, we have plus or minus the square root of 49. That plus or minus stays. And we're just going to have plus or minus 7 because 7 times 7 is 49. For B, we have plus or minus the square root of 25, so that plus or minus is going to stay, and the square root of 25 is 5, so it's just plus or minus 5. For B, we have plus or minus 12. If we simplified that 12 to find the prime factorization of it, we have 3 and 4. The 4 is 2 and 2. Those two 2's pair up, so it's going to be plus or minus 2 square root 3. For D, we have plus or minus the square root of 16 over 9. So we're going to keep the plus or minus. We're going to do the square root of 16 over the square root of 9. The square root of 16 is 4. The square root of 9 is 3. So it's plus or minus 4/3. For E, we have plus or minus the square root of 0.27. So the plus or minus is going to stay. That 27 is going to go over 100. And we're going to do the square root of 27 over 100. So this again is the square root of 27 over the square root of 100. Keep the plus or minus in front of it. That 27 factors out to be 3 and 9. The 9 is 3 and 3. So groups of 2 here pair up. So we're going to have plus or minus 3 square root 3 all over 10. For the next set of examples, we are solving with these. For all of these, we're going to have a variable squared is equal to a number. But when we do that, our whole idea is to isolate that variable first and then take the square root of both sides. When we take the square root of both sides, in this case, we are solving for all possible values that variable can be. So when we go to take the square root of both sides, we want to make sure that we include both the positive and the negative option that we could have. So for example A, we have m squared is equal to 49. We take the square root of both sides. We're going to have m is equal to plus or minus 7. For B, we have 5r squared is equal to 45. We divide each side by 5. We get r squared is equal to 9. And then from here, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So r is equal to plus or minus 3. For C, we have 8x squared is equal to 64. So we're going to divide each side by 8. Get x squared is equal to 8. Then take the square root of both sides. So the square root of x squared is x. However, the 8 is 4 and 2. The 4 is 2 and 2. So that's 2 square root 2. Put the plus or minus in front of it. We have x is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 2. For D, we have 4x squared is equal to 80, so we're going to divide each side by 4. So x squared is equal to 20. We take the square root of both sides. We remember that plus or minus is going to go in front of our answer. That 20 is 2 and 10. The 10 is 2 and 5. So those two 2's pair up. We're going to have x is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 5. For these examples in 3, we want to make sure that we get our variable by itself. So we're going to start by, for A, 4x squared minus 5 is equal to 2. We're going to start by moving the 5 over. We'd add it to both sides. Oops, I'm giving you your answer instead of the plus 5. There we go. So we have 4x squared is equal to 5. Then we divide each side by 4 to get the x squared by itself. So x squared is equal to 5 over 4. We're going to take the square root of both sides and have x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5 over 2. There we go. For B, we have 2x squared minus 8 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 8 to both sides. get 2x squared is equal to 8. Then we divide each side by 2. So x squared is equal to 4. We take the square root of both sides. Remember to put the plus or minus in front of our answer. And the square root of 4 is 2. For C, we have 3x squared plus 6 is equal to 33. So we're going to start by subtracting 6 from each side. So 3x squared is equal to, the 3 is going to turn into a 13, making the other 3 a 2. So 13 minus 6 is 7. The 2 minus 0 is 2. We divide each side by 3, and we get x squared is equal to 9. Take the square root of both sides. X is equal to plus or minus 3. For D, we have 5x squared minus 9 is equal to 2, so we're going to add the 9 to both sides. We have 5x squared is equal to 11. Then we divide each side by 5. We get x squared is equal to 11 over 5. We take the square root of both sides. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 11 over the square root of 5. Now with this, we are going to rationalize that denominator, which just means that we're going to multiply each of the top and the bottom by the square root of 5. So this is going to become x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 55 over 5. For E, we have 4y squared plus 7 is equal to 19. We're going to subtract the 7 from each side. And we have 4y squared is equal to 12. We divide each side by 4. We get y squared is equal to 3. And then we take the square root of both sides. So y is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. For F, we have 3x squared minus 18 is equal to 3. So we're going to add the 18 to both sides. Oops. So 3x squared is equal to 21. We divide each side by 3. So x squared is equal to 7. And then divide each side, take the square root of both sides. So x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. So with these last two, we weren't able to take that square root of the number, so we just leave it the plus or minus the square root of the number. For their next set of examples, you have a binomial squared is equal to a number. Sometimes these binomials are going to be multiplied by a number. Sometimes they're just going to be by themselves. Their whole idea is to get that binomial squared by itself. So we have, for A, x plus 6 squared is equal to 64. Because that binomial is by itself already, we can just take the square root of both sides. The square root of the x plus 6 squared is going to get rid of the square root and the exponent. So it's just going to be x plus 6 is equal to, now you took the square root of both sides here, you're working with an equal sign, you got to put the plus or minus in front of the answer for the square root of 64, which is plus or minus 8. From here, separate this into two equations and solve both. So you have x plus 6 is equal to negative 8, as well as x plus 6 is equal to positive 8. So we're going to move the 6 over by subtracting it from each side for both of these equations to get negative 14 and 2. For B, we have 5 times x minus 4 squared is equal to 40. So we're going to start by dividing each side by 5. So we're going to have x minus 4 squared is equal to 8. We take the square root of both sides. So that square root gets rid of the exponent. So it's just going to be x minus 4 is equal to that square root of 8. You have 2 and 4. The 4 is 2 and 2. Your two 2's pair up. So that's plus or minus 2 square root 2. We move that 4 over by adding it to both sides. So this is going to give us x is equal to 4 plus or minus 2 square root 2. That 2 square root 2, the 2 in front of the square root 2, is part of it. You cannot separate it and add it or subtract it with the 4, so it has to stay 4 plus or minus 2 square root 2. The two terms are not like terms, which is why you leave it 2 square root 2. For C, we have x plus 5 squared is equal to 36. So we're going to start by taking the square root of both sides. The square root cancels out the exponent, which is going to leave us with x plus 5 on the left side. And the square root of 36 is both positive and negative 6. So we're going to separate this into two equations. X plus 5 is equal to 6. X plus 5 is equal to negative 6. We are going to subtract each side with that 5 to get x by itself. So x is going to equal 1 and x is equal to negative 11. For D, we have 3 times x minus 5 squared is equal to 18. So we're going to start by dividing each side by 3. So we have x minus 5 squared is equal to 6. We take the square root of both sides, so we're going to have x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. You can't simplify the square root of 6, which is why we're leaving it the plus or minus square root of 6. We're going to add 5 to both sides to get x by itself, and we have x is equal to 5 plus or minus the square root of 6. For E, we have 2 times x minus 3 squared is equal to negative 32. So we're going to start by dividing each side by 2 to give ourselves x minus 3 squared is equal to negative 16. From here, we're going to take the square root of both sides. It gets rid of the 2 as our exponent to leave us with x minus 3. However, you cannot have a negative underneath the radical. So because that negative is there, you cannot do this. So your answer is no solution. For F, we have 4 times x plus 10 squared is equal to 24. So we are going to start by dividing each side by 4. So x plus 10 squared is equal to 6. We take the square root of both sides. It cancels out the exponent. So we have x plus 10 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. From here, subtract the 10 from each side. X is equal to negative 10 plus or minus the square root of 6. And again, that square root of 6 and that 10 are not like terms, so you leave them the way they are. For G, we have x minus 9 squared is equal to 64. We're just going to take the square root of both sides since that binomial squared is by itself. So we're going to have x minus 9 is equal to plus or minus 8. So because that 8 is a whole number, so is the 9, we're going to move the 9 over, but we're going to make two equations with this. So we're going to have x minus 9 is equal to negative 8, as well as x minus 9 is equal to positive 8. Move the 9 over by adding it to both sides. We're going to have x is equal to 1 and x is equal to 17. For H, we have 2 times 3x minus 5 squared plus 15 is equal to 7. So again, we want to undo addition or subtraction before we undo multiplication or division. So with 15, we're going to subtract by each side to get 2 times 3x minus 5 squared is equal to negative 8. From here, we're going to divide each side by that 2. So we have 3x minus 5 squared is equal to negative 4. From here, we would take the square root of both sides. We have a negative underneath that radical sign, so we cannot do this. So we get no solution for our answer. If we look at our next example, we have a word problem that says a contractor is building a fenced-in playground at a daycare. The playground will be rectangular with its width equal to half its length. The total area will be 5,000 square feet. Determine how many feet of fencing the contractor will see. So if we are working with a rectangle. It says the playground will be rectangular and its width is equal to half its length. So our width is equal to 1/2 the length, and this is the length. So the total area, so remember area is length times width, is going to be equal to 5,000 square feet. So this is just saying that our length times 1/2 our length is equal to 5,000 feet. So we have to find L, and we have to find 1/2 of L. So we're going to use L times 1/2 L is equal to 5,000. So if we multiply these two, we have 1/2 times L squared is equal to 5,000. If we multiply each side by 2, it gets rid of the 1/2 in front of the L squared. So we're just going to be left with L squared is equal to 10,000. So from here, we take the square root of both sides. So that 10,000 is 100 times 100, so that L is equal to 100 feet. Now our width is 1/2 of that, so width is equal to 1/2 times L, which is 1/2 times 100. So from here, we are going to divide the 100 by 2 to get that our width is 50. And then that's feet. So our length here is the 100, the width is 50. We're asked to find how many feet of fencing there will be. So we have to find now the perimeter of this. So remember, your perimeter is equal to 2 times your length plus 2 times your width. So this is just going to be 2 times 100 plus 2 times 50. 2 times the 100 is 200, and then 2 times the 50 is 100. So P, our perimeter, is equal to 300 feet. For B, it says a person standing on the second floor balcony drops keys to a friend standing below the balcony. The keys are dropped from a height of 10 feet. The height in feet of the keys as they fall is given by the formula h of t is equal to negative 16t squared plus 10, where t is the time in seconds since the keys were dropped. The friend catches the keys at a height of 4 feet. Find the elapsed time before the keys were caught. So what we're going to do with this one is we're going to replace that h of t with 4 and solve for t. So we would have 4 is equal to negative 16t squared plus 10. From here, we would go ahead and just get your t squared by itself. So we would subtract the 10 from each side. We would be left with negative 6 is equal to negative 16t squared. We would divide each side by the negative 16. And we would have t squared is equal to 6 over 16. Because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Now, the reason why I'm leaving this like this and not simplifying it is because I can take the square root of that 16 and get a whole number. So that way I wouldn't have to rationalize my denominator. So I'm just going to leave it as t is equal to the square root of 6 over 4 seconds. Now, you don't have a calculator to work with, so that's why we're leaving this in the radical form that we have. For our next example, we have a zookeeper is buying fencing to enclose a pen at the zoo. The pen is an isosceles right triangle. This is important. There is already a fence along the hypotenuse, which borders a path. The area of the pen will be 4,500 square feet. The zookeeper can buy the fencing in whole feet only. How many feet of fencing should he buy? All right, so we have an isosceles right triangle. So we have a triangle that has 2 side lengths that are the same with a hypotenuse. That hypotenuse is already fenced. So we don't have to worry about the hypotenuse, but the area of this is 4,500 square feet. So a triangle's area is equal to 1/2 times the base times the height, or 1/2, or the base times the height divided by 2. Here, your base and your height are the same amounts because it's an isosceles triangle, which means your two side lengths are the same. So with this, we can set the 4,500 equal to our base times our height divided by 2. The base times the height is the same number here. So this is the same exact thing as 4,500 is equal to x times x over 2. To get rid of that 2 in the denominator, we can just multiply each side by 2. We would get 9,000 is equal to x times x, which is x squared. So then take the square root of both sides, and x is equal to 300. So if this is 300 feet and this is 300 feet, let's add those together to get the amount of fencing that we need left over. So 300 plus 300 is 600 feet of fencing. All right, so if we look at some extra examples here, we are going to be solving these. The first one that we have, which is number 10, is m squared minus 54 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 54 to both sides. We get m squared is equal to 54. We take the square root of both sides and get that 54 is 6 and 9. 9 is 3 and 3. 6 is 3 and 2. So 2 3s, a 2 and a 3 left over. M is equal to plus or minus 3 square root 6. For our next one, we have, give me one second, I'm just trying to pull this up somewhere else so that way I can look at the questions as we do them. All right, so for 11, we have 6x squared minus 18 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 18 to both sides. We have 6x squared is equal to 18. Then we divide each side by 6 and get x squared is equal to 3. We take the square root of both sides and get that x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. For 12, we have 7m squared minus 42 is equal to 0. So we're going to add the 42 to both sides. We'll be left with 7m squared is equal to 42. Then we divide each side by 7. So m squared is equal to 6. We take the square root of both sides. So m is equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. And move up here for 13. We have 4y squared plus 7 is equal to 19. So we're going to we're going to subtract each side with the 7. We have 4y squared is equal to 12. We divide each side by the 4. Get y squared is equal to 3. Take the square root of both sides, and y is equal to plus or minus the square root of 3. For 14, we have 4r squared minus 7 is equal to 29. So we are going to add the 7 to both sides. We get 4r squared is equal to 36. We divide by 4 on each side to get r squared is equal to 9. Then we take the square root of both sides to get r is equal to plus or minus 3. For 15, we have 3z squared minus 18 is equal to 3. We're going to add the 18 to both sides. We have 3z squared is equal to 21. Then we divide each side by 3 to get z squared is equal to 7. we take the square root of both sides, so z is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. For 16, we have x plus 6 squared is equal to 16. So we're going to take the square root of both sides. We're going to have x plus 6 is equal to plus or minus 4. We separate this into two equations, so x plus 6 is equal to negative 4, and x plus 6 is equal to positive 4. Move the 6 over, subtract it from each side, so x is equal to negative 10, and x is equal to negative 2. For 17, we have y minus 6 squared is equal to 13. So we're going to start by taking the square root of both sides. We're going to be left with y minus 6 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 13. We add that 6 to both sides, and we're left with y is equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 13. For 18, we have y plus 2 squared is equal to 12. All right, so we're going to take the square root of both sides. That 12 is 4 and 3. The 4 is 2 and 2, so that's 2 square root 3. So y plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 3. We move the 2 over by subtracting it from each side and get y is equal to negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root 3. For 19, we have s minus 7 squared is equal to 28. So this, we're going to take the square root of both sides, get s minus 7 is equal to plus or minus 2 square root 7, because the 28 is 4 and 7, the 4 is 2 and 2. From here, we're going to move the 7 over by adding it to both sides. And we're going to be left with s is equal to 7 plus or minus 2 square root 7. For 20, we have z minus 3 squared is equal to 32. So take the square root of both sides. The 32 is 4 and 8. The 8 is 4 and 2. The 4's pair up. So that leaves us with z minus 3 is equal to plus or minus 4 square root 2. From here, we add the 3 to both sides and just get z is equal to 3 plus or minus 4 square root 2. For 21, we have 2 times x minus 5 squared is equal to 18. We're going to start by dividing each side by 2 to get x minus 5 squared is equal to 9. We take the square root of both sides, and we're left with x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 3. So this is going to turn into x minus 5 is equal to negative 3, and x minus 5 is equal to positive 3. We add the 5 to both sides, and we have that x is equal to 2, and x is equal to 8. For 22, we have 5 times m minus 8 squared is equal to 25. We're going to divide each side by the 5. So m minus 8 is, squared is equal to 5. Then we take the square root of both sides and get m minus 8 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 5. We add the 8 to both sides. So m is equal to 8 plus or minus the square root of 5. For 23, we have 8 times x plus 3 squared is equal to 56. So we're going to first divide each side by 56. Divide each side by 8. So we're going to have x plus 3 squared is equal to 7. From here, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. Then we subtract by 3 from each side. So x is equal to -3 plus or minus the square root of 7. Move to a new page. For 24, we are given 6 times z plus 5 squared is equal to 42. So for this one, we're going to divide each side by 6. So z plus 5 squared is equal to 7. From here, we take the square root of both sides. So z plus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 7. Then we subtract each side by 5 and get z is equal to -5 plus or minus the square root of 7. For 25, we have x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal to 16. We need to factor this x squared plus 6x plus 9. Your factors of 9 that add up to be 6 are 3 and 3. So this is going to be x plus 3 squared is equal to 16. We take the square root of both sides. So we have x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus 4. This is going to separate to be x plus 3 is equal to -4, as well as x plus 3 is equal to +4. We move the 3 over by subtracting it from each side. And we get that x is equal to -7 and x is equal to 1. For 26, we are given x squared minus 14x plus 49 is equal to 64. So we're going to factor this. This factors of 49 that add up to be -14 are -7 and -7. So it's going to be x minus 7 squared is equal to 64. We take the square root of both sides. We are left with x minus 7 is equal to plus or minus 8. We separate this into two equations. So we're going to have x minus 7 is equal to -8, as well as x minus 7 is equal to +8. Add the 7 to both sides. So x is equal to -1, and x is equal to 15. For 27, we're given r squared minus 22r plus 121 is equal to 4. So this r squared minus 22r plus 121 is going to factor out to be r minus 11 squared is equal to 4. We take the square root of both sides. So r minus 11 is equal to plus or minus 2. We move the 11 over by adding it to both sides. And remember, this is going to be r is equal to 11 minus 2, and r is equal to 11 plus 2. So r is equal to 9, and r is equal to 13.